very, very excited to have our dear sister here, Akila Richards, to teach and to speak with us and to dance with us in mountains today. Yes, 2020 was brutal, right? It was tough year. The phrase "seeing double" comes to mind. I learned recently that the idea of seeing double, the phrase, the idiomatic expression, was first used in the 17th century, and it describes confusion, being drunk, exasperation, anxiety. When you see double, your feet aren't planted on the ground. You're wheeling, you're flailing, and 2020 seems 2020. Like someone said that the year was so momentous that they named it twice. 2020, seeing double, seeing double. I wanted to defract that idea of seeing double for a while. There is a place where seeing double is the norm, and it's not the exception to the rule. I'm speaking about twins and twinning and giving birth to twins. Three places in the world, you might know about this and you might not, produce more twins than any other place in the world. Scientists don't understand why. They've tried to look at genetics. They've tried to look at the environment. It's still very mysterious. Now, across the world, monozygotic, dizygotic, identical and fraternal twins seem to come about the same rates, 4 births per 1,000 births. But in Africa, Africa has about an average of 45 births to 1,000 births, twins. But more than any other place in the world is a town in Nigeria called Igbora in Oyo State, a state called Oyo, named after the old Oyo Kingdom, where the rate is about 150 births to 1,000. In fact, if you're not a twin, then there's something, there's something wrong somewhere. People grow up in that town and they grow up knowing twins. If you're a school-going child in Igbora, which is 80 kilometers from Lagos State, I believe, it's most likely you would grow up in school, pass through school, or pass through a classroom with 5 other pairs of twins in your class. They have rituals for celebrating this, statues there. It's known as the world's capital for twins, Igbora. The 2 other towns, the 2 other places in the world are Candido Godoy, which is in Brazil, and Kodini in Kerala. So India, Brazil, and Nigeria, the capitals for twins in the world, befuddles and confuses scientists. We don't know why that happens, but people here know how to give birth to twins. Yes, Iyafalola Ibeji, which is the Yoruba term for twins, Ibeji. Mama Ibeji, you would see people would call on the streets of Lagos. Mama Ibeji is a term of celebration. It's basically celebrating you for being a mother of twins. Mama Ibeji. Just want to tell you a bit about the rituals around this. Yoruba people have this rich cosmology, this rich mythology around twins. The first child, the first twin is called Taye. Taye. And the second one, the one that comes afterwards, is called Kehinde. Kehinde. But really, that's just in order of birth. These are birth order names. But there's a deeper story here. The Yoruba people believe that that Taye, whose name literally means the first to taste life, the first to taste life. Yoruba people believe that Taye is actually the younger one, that Kehinde is the elder. In the womb, Kehinde sends Taye out into the world to see the world, to taste it. If the coast is clear, cry to me, okay? Give me a signal and then I will come afterwards. So that's the hidden conspiracy, the hidden story and myth, of Taye and Kehinde. And Kehinde means the one who comes afterwards. That's just the one who comes behind. But actually, if you stretch out the names, the full name, Taye, is actually Omotaye Lolu, which means the one who comes first tastes life and will excel. And then Omo Kehinde Gbegbo is the stretched out name of Kehinde, and it literally means the one who comes last shall become the elder, or is the elder. So that's a beautiful cosmological arrangement there. But it doesn't stop there. You see, we're really into this twinning thing. There's an entire cosmological industry around twins with the Yoruba people. Birth order names do not just stop at twins. It proceeds, with the children that come after twins. So it's not only Taye and Kehinde. The one who is born after Kehinde is given the name Idowu, which means the one who comes after the twins. And the one who comes after Idowu is given the name Alaba, which means the one who comes after the one who comes after the twins. And the one who comes after Alaba is called Oni, and the one who comes after that is called Ola. We have a whole thing there. It's an entire framework of ceremonial celestial names, for calibrated to this momentous eruption of the twin pair. And so there's something else I want to share here about twins. Idowu is what I want to share about. Idowu is what brings my attention or captures my attention today. Idowu is hardly spoken about because Idowu is in the shadow of the twins. But Idowu has this personality. Idowus are usually headstrong, stubborn, and so they have another secret name attached to their emergence, Eshu Lein Ibeji, which means the devil that comes after the twins. Because the Idowus are headstrong, stubborn, they're extroverts, sometimes introverts, but they're the tricksters, right? They're very trickstery. And I bring this to your attention because of something that came to my attention last year. So after I got married, after EJ and I, my wife her name is EJ, after we got married, my mother and her bonded deeply. They were already close while we were dating and all of that, but they really got close after our first child came, Alethea. And we were lecturers in the university. And so when I go off to teach, I would come and tag EJ, and she goes off to teach. She's a biologist. She would go teach her classes and come back. But my mother was principally the primary caregiver. She relocated from London, from the UK, to take care of our children, of our child in Nigeria. And during those times when she was at home with EJ, they would talk about everything, mostly to my embarrassment. All the things that I did when I was a nerd and kid, all the things that I didn't know about, all the things that I wouldn't want anybody to know about. My mother shared with EJ that, did you know this about bio? Did you know this about bio? Stuff like that, those kinds of things. And so my mother, in getting close to her, told her a story that I think I'd forgotten or was some kind of myth and didn't quite hit home. A story that really impacted me last year when it came to me. My mother told EJ, my wife, of the trauma that she had experienced with her children. That after her firstborn, my elder sister, she gave birth to twins, two boys, Taye and Kende. But they died soon after birth, the same day. And I didn't know this. Somehow, this was something that I think came to our attention when I was a kid, maybe 10 years old, and I'd soon forgotten it. We didn't talk about it much, but it came with all its force again that my mother had lost children, two brothers of mine, which makes me actually Ido, the devil that comes after the twins. The third boy, not the first, after all. I'm still processing that these days, that I have haunting brothers, and their passing away gave room for me to emerge, fertilized the womb, the ground for my emergence. But the reason I share the story of Idowu with you is because I feel Idowu is the name that might be calibrated to loss and emergence or reemergence. It might be the name, the secret name for what comes afterwards, what comes after a time of loss, especially when that loss is a matter of twins, like 2020 was, a matter of seeing double. Maybe Idowu is the name of revenant communities. So I guess what I'm doing here is I don't want to welcome you back with a tale of hope or a tale of hopelessness. I want to move beyond that binary and say Idowu is the invitation to a crack, to possibility, to openings. I know we're tired, we're exhausted. There's a lot to process. There's a lot going on around the world. The promise of these openings is that there's something to do, that we're not without help, and that even death can be generative. Even loss can give birth to new openings, can fertilize spontaneous, headstrong realities. Issue comes after loss. So welcome back to We Will Dance with Mountains in this year of Idul, in this year after seeing double. I don't know what it brings for us in terms of gifts and prophecies. I still feel we're in the decade of the fugitive, but I believe very strongly that this is the year inviting us to do something as revenant communities coming out of this time of so many deaths, so many hollowing out of institutions, so many times of so many moments of trauma and despair. I feel that this year is inviting us to process and do something with that, to stay with that, with the understanding that there might be an Alaba or Alaba coming after this Ido, that there is yet more joy and generativity and hope and sometimes hopelessness to come. Our work is not done. So we will dance with mountains. Let's begin. Very quickly, just so we get started, we're about to go into a teaching session with Akila Richards. By way of introduction, I'll just tell a very, very brief story about an Orisha called Oshun and Oba and Oya. three of them, three wives to the god of thunder and lightning and storms, Shango. You might have heard of Shango. I know Jordy did something with Shango, or was it Ogun, the god of metal? I can't remember which one you did
Ogun.
something. Ogun, it was Ogun. Shango he's the Thor of the Yoruba pantheon. And there's a story that comes from the old Oyo Empire, um, of Shango coming to his house one day, basically, and meeting a horrible meal in front of him. Apparently, just prior to that moment, Oshun, or Oba, who was the elder wife, the first wife, who doesn't have any kids, who doesn't know how to cook and is jealous of Oshun's status as the most beloved wife, asks Oshun, "What is your secret? Why is it that our husband is constantly eating your meal, constantly calling for your meal? What do you put in it? What's your ingredients? What's your recipe?" And Oshun knows that she might lose her status as the favored wife. So she says, you see, years ago, I cut off a part of my ear and I put a part of my ear in the soup, just a little part of my ear. If you do that, our husband would love you and love your meal. Um, and Oba says, she's stupid, obviously. Why would she tell me her secret? What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off my entire ear. And then he would love me profoundly. And so she does the Van Gogh thing and slices off her ear. And the god of thunder comes back and sees this piece of ear, playing it by ear, just bobbing in the soup, just floating in and out. And he screams, rage, just burns everything down. The wives escape. They run away, they flee. Oba runs away, Oshun runs away, but they don't just run away, you see, they run away and they become rivers. They hide into rivers. Um, and if you go to some states in Nigeria today, the confluence, the place where the rivers meet, River Oba and River Oshun, they're still fighting, you see. That's the tale. The myth is that they're still struggling, they're still wrestling, they're still arguing with each other. But I tell that tale for more than just the perverse acts of cutting one's ear or to tell the myth behind two rivers. It's also to notice how hiding is a form of epistemology on its own. That hiding, and not just hiding behind, but hiding into, could be a form of resistance, because hiding is the fugitive's way. The fugitive is invited to hide, and not just to hide, to become with the world. I don't see that as a form of weakness, actually, and I don't think Yoruba people do as well. That Oshun hid into a river, and that was a sign of strength, a form of resistance. My sister here, Akila, speaks about resistance. She writes about resistance. She lives it in her bones. Um, I was very privileged to write the foreword for her book, Raising Free People, Unschooling as a Form of Liberation. Was the full title, Unschooling as Liberation and Healing Work. And she also founded an organization called Raising Free People Network. I met her in South Africa, and I immediately knew that she was a sister. I call everyone sister, brother all the time, but this one felt really real, and I saw her and I said, "You look exactly like my sister. You feel like my sister." And then, Akila, I think I have your permission to share this. I'm just going to wing it, okay? She did a DNA ancestry test. Akila is from Jamaica, you see. And she found out that a part of her is from Nigeria, which confirms the sister theory. So I feel very, very excited and honored that she said yes to being a part of this. She's a dear friend and teacher of these times. So please give it up for Akila Richards. Akila.
Hey, I hear drums and ukuleles. Yes. Peace, 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 everybody. This is so, so good. I was saying in my breakout group, which was awesome, that it's particularly wonderful to be in spaces where people aren't looking for a grand answer, not really looking for solutions, but that it's more so an exploration, and that the exploration is it. It's not the solution. It's just it. It's where we are. It's what we're about. It's how we are understanding. It's the practice. Just being is the practice. And for me, what I love is to be in spaces where we can talk about how that happens for people, how that sense of connecting to being and understanding, not so focused on the answer, but just being, and not just being as in not doing, understand being as part of doing, and unlearning and unraveling and all of these things that I know have been really opened up inside this space that Bio and friends are putting together. So it's good to be here, to not try to solve things together. I'm Akila. I'm here on Muskogee Creek territory, so-called Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm just here to be present together. And I accepted Bio's invitation because I knew that it wasn't a space to try to solve anything together, and that it was a place where you talk about things like fugitivity and unraveling and decolonizing, and that's my language. That's my all day, everyday language. I also said yes because it's nice to want to like put on, the things that are my comfort zone, to put color on my face and to put on my earrings that I got from my mama. Aren't these cute? And I found out that, as Bio said, that I'm Nigerian, and it's actually not so much part. So on the matrilineal side, it's 99%. And then my father did the test a couple of years ago, and it's like 70 something percent on, on his side. And it's like Yoruba, Fulani is like very specific. And then I started to do more research about Fulani and the women and earrings. And I was like, bet. I was so excited to tell my mother about the earring thing. I'm like, Mom, that's where it came from. That's why we will like, look, if I put my earrings on for you, I like you, and it's like the bigger the earrings, the more there's like some sort of connection. So it feels good to be able to be in a space to talk about these things, as well as unravelings, to talk about all the things, my earrings and my unravelings. And much of those things for me, both like how I choose what I'm going to put on, how I want to feel, and how I want to show up, so much of that work for me has come through mothering. So much of what I talk about is very much framed in that dynamic, because the first treaty that I signed, like with my consent, was really with my daughters. And that feels really relevant here now in particular, because I understand treaty to be about making peace, and to often be entered into with uncertainty, and from a place of recognizing mutual sovereignty. Right? And treaties can be between multiple, it's not just like bilateral. Um, and I feel like there's many opportunities for, and many breaks in treaties that are happening now that feel relevant to presence here. So I'll say a little bit about my why, and about mothering and how I got to here. So one of the terms that I use for myself is an unschooler. And it's a term that I, like many other terms, there are things that I feel like I made up. And then of course, as I get older, I really settle into the knowing of everything is everything and things being old, because we were unschooling before, like I knew that that was a thing, and that there were, all these different people doing it and calling it this. But really, for our family, myself, my partner Chris, and Marley and Sage, who we call ours, but they're also their own, for the four of us, unschooling has really been how we began to understand boundaries and trust and consent and dancing with, and thinking about power as not something that looks like this or like this, but as power that looks, it looks like this, and that it is like those rivers. It's a thing that flows and it's a thing that allows. So much of that language, so much of that knowing came from how I learned and unlearned Marley and Sage, again, who I call my daughters. So much of that. And then it turns out that so much of that also translates into my relationships with all other people that I can touch and see, people that are reaching me, energies that work through me in a moment. In our breakout group, we were talking about anger, among other things, and seeing anger, for example, very differently as a result of having a different relationship with Marley and Sage. And so those are some of the places. That's why I wanted to talk about roadmaps, and destinations, because I feel like there's a lot of like destination peddling happening right now, where we're like, we're going to get back to norm, or it's going to be way better, or it's this, like we need a destination. And so therefore we want a roadmap. We call for that. And what I embody, and one of the few things that I know good, is that unraveling uncertainty, unschooling is like plenty grounds for a path, plenty grounds for a practice, plenty grounds for collaboration and deep learning. Terms that I've had to snatch back from, the settler colonial realities in which I was groomed and socialized, first as a Jamaican under very British colonial idea, and then moving to the US. Really clear ideas about the destinations that I had to follow, the destinations that were relevant and present. So good student was a destination. Shiny, charismatic is a destination. Graduate, nice, pretty, manly, athletic. All of these things, I began to understand them as destinations in my unschooling, and then to look at the treaty, the consent factor. Like, is this a destination that I choose? Is that a destination that the person over whom I have power, which are my children, are these destinations that they choose? So really, so much of my own unraveling began there. And then I began to see how I was choosing destinations for and with other people outside of my children, and what that meant and what that cost. The fares of that, FARE, like all of the different fares that I'd been paying and forcing other people to pay because I was attached to these destinations. So when I was talking with Bio about what might be useful here, one of the things that arose was very much about destinations and the roadmap. And there's this thing that I say all the time because it was a download that I needed, is that resistance is the roadmap. Resistance is the roadmap. So again, in my mothering, there were plenty opportunities for resistance, because that's what kids do, and that's what we name it as. They push back, they ignore our boundaries, they pee where they want to pee, when they want to pee. They do what they want to do. So there's like mad resistance. And my job, as I understood it, was to learn how to stop that, how to make sure that they were compliant, how to make sure that they were safe, how to make sure that they made sense essentially within my scope of understanding. But it turns out that the people who chose me, Marley and Sage, they were not about that life. They were not about doing the things, not even for somebody like me who's really good at being like, this is what I want, this is how I need it to look, like show up or show up, they just were not like that. And so at first I applied my same settler colonial mentality of force, being the person in power, making this face, the mom face, pinches, slaps, all of the things, right? I'm looking in the chat. And feeling like not only was that okay, it was necessary. The way that I cared for, the way that I loved, the way that I partnered was to control lovingly in my nice, sweet mommy voice, but to still do all those same things. And then when Marley and Sage, who are now 16 and 14, when they became what, 6, like when Marley was 6, yes, so school age, which is a term that I don't use, but when they became what we tend to call school age, their resistance increased. Marley would continually say that she did not have time to think her thoughts. I don't have time to think my thoughts. I'm like, Um, and I'd be like, okay, that sucks, but like you're in school. Think your thoughts when you get home. There, hun, pat on the head, after school snack, keep it moving. Um, a lot of that. And then when Sage started school, it was a very different thing for her. She would talk about, there's this term that we now use that she brought into our lives about peopling on. She would say that they keep peopling on me, and it took over and over again those incantations, like the girls just bringing in those same words in that same way with very similar body language over and over. Like I came to learn that that's what they were doing. Like it was their practice in front of me, light the fire, put the shit out, like she's not getting it, what are the signals? They did those rituals over and over until Chris and I were like, wait a minute, maybe it matters. Maybe, not definitely, maybe it matters that you're constantly doing things that you don't want to do in spaces where you don't want to do them, and that the people that you trust the most aren't doing anything about it. Like, so, and this is not a school or not school tale. This is an unraveling and recalibrating and a roadmaps story. So they did that over and over, and eventually we were like, okay, bet, yeah, damn, that's messed up. Let's see. So we did a lot of the things, like just got a lot more present on the PTA board and like did good shit after school, better museums, just all the other things until that opening of recognizing what they were doing and the way that they kept throwing up the flares, that observation overall was over time was its own education. So eventually the thing that we could be okay with, the there, hun, became like, we just had more questions about it. So what would happen if we continue to ignore what it was that they were saying they needed? Like, could they trust us then? Like, what aren't they telling us, since we tend to, like just, we started to humanize them essentially. We really started to see them as people who were in a situation that maybe we could do something about. And then, so that led to better listening ears. It was disruptive. So there was this awareness and this, I do this thing called Raising Free People work, and there are 4 parts to it that kind of frame this story. So it's like the awareness, which wasn't just them saying that they didn't want to be there, but it was the awareness of like the potential implications of that if we as their adults continue to just be like, like who were we serving, who were we allies for? That was the first awareness. So were we allies of the school system to try to continue to bring studenthood to fore for Marley and Sage, or were we allies of Marley and Sage, which meant then we would need to be listening to them at least as much as we were listening to the ideas of who they could become through schooling. So that brought up an awareness of how we were parenting past them, like past who they actually were and what they were saying and doing, and more so parenting over to what they could become. So that awareness happened. And so the constant awareness then led to that second one, which was a disruption. And disruptions are so important for me because how I'm groomed, I'm going to push through a thing. I'm a Black Caribbean woman. Like we are groomed and designed to like push through a thing, make as many people comfortable as possible along the way at the expense of self for the greater good. So I was all up in that zone. And so the disruption came with recognizing that the more we began to listen to and for Marley and Sage and to humanize them, like to think about them as potentially sovereign beings who should have a say in what they were doing with their time, it really disrupted the matrix. It really disrupted the idea then that they needed to be better at studenthood. And then we started to recognize the sort of contortionism that was happening that I now call interrupting ritual. It's like this history of interrupting the ritual of childhood, who they are, what their interests are, what their ecology might look like if they were gravitating towards things, and if they had the space to sit and talk to somebody for 3 hours and make friends in the airport with somebody that we would have never even talked to. Just starting to recognize that they, just like they came with things. Like when they were born, they came with things. There's a name, and I don't remember where the name originates, but it's Entezaki. And it means she who comes with her own things, like she comes with her things. And I get these downloads, these things that feel really random that I oftentimes learn are not. And that was one of the things, like the fact that we all come with our own things, and that if I wasn't careful, then I would colonize or continue to colonize my children because I wasn't honoring whatever it was that they came with. I said, no, I see you as land, I see you as a thing, but I have the light and the way and the knowing, and I'm going to make it good for all people. I'm going to make you a good citizen of the world. I know you want to sit over there and draw or do whatever, but I'm going to do this thing. The disruption brought in the clarity that that was very much colonizer behavior. And so then I started to think about myself as an oppressor, which was a very different thing than the other reality of being someone who is also oppressed, and also someone who in some ways feels free. So it really led to this process of looking at the roadmap, looking at the things that had helped me to determine what mothering and parenting and my identity and the identities of my children, what those things looked like, and where consent was in that, and where sovereignty was in that, and where ritual was present, things that could clue me in. Like I now see learning as ritual, things that clue me in and bring a lot of different things, seen and unseen, named and unnamed, into presence, that each of us with our own ecology will tap into a certain way to learn. So then learning couldn't be given to me or my children. it was a part of their ecology. And yes, there could be knowledge that can be dropped into that, but if there's no consent, how then does that translate into wisdom? Not trauma that then gives you a knowing, but like wisdom, right? And so these are the lessons that I continue to learn as an unschooler that also very much inform my communities and my communication right now as me being a part of us, we alive in this, whatever this is, in this body, in this country, in this skin. Um, that's really a lot of what I invite, right? Invite you into specifically the understanding of all of the ways that sovereignty and freedom coexist, the ways that we hold a love and a care and a regard, and also our own bias and baggage, and looking past and loving past. Um, Having the opportunities right now to do that with each other. You're so welcome. I'm looking in the chat from time to time. There's so much of an opportunity here for us to reimagine and reclaim our roadmaps and our destinations, and to look at the ways that sovereignty and freedom and liberation and oppression might live even inside us, and what we might be costing other people and ourselves now. Simple example, like how we might show up into this space. So I love that even though I don't get to live where I want to live as somebody who was nomadic prior to this, I don't get to live where I want to live in the same way, but like I can wear my pajamas, which I'm wearing at the moment, for a thing with like Bio, the homie, with other people who like deeply fuck with this same sort of thing, and that I can have on my pajamas, and I can wear my favorite sweater as my pants. And I can be close to the bathroom because I'm navigating all of these things as my body is in a particularly, whatever the word is for this, stage of healing that needs the bathroom close by, and that I can do that and this at the same time is a form of liberation work. I was liberated from needing to show up to wherever Bio is or wherever Ernie is to come be together, to talk about unraveling in the middle of things that feel like uprisings to some and falling for others. So that's what I bring often, is that invitation to look at things like I have my sticky notes here, siege, right? To think about what that might mean now, in this country, in the US, a few days ago, the Capitol was under siege. And the term siege is one that's been really sitting with me, and one that I felt like it was okay to offer here, because I think that there's an opportunity to be with it differently, to see what it might mean to impose that, in a way that doesn't feel good, and also to impose it in a way that does. So when I talk about these 4 parts of the Raising Free People practice, talked about awareness and disruption. And as we continue to disrupt even our vocabulary, thinking about things like roadmaps and destinations and studenthood and siege, then I think about that 3rd element of it, which is deschooling, right? So there's these awarenesses that really bring you over into disruptive spaces. You unplug a little bit, you plug in a little deeper, right? All of these disruptions happen. And for some of us, disruptions need to be like rage, like fire, like river, or like waterfall. And then for others of us, it's like stillness. So to even offer the invitation for you to be with what disruption might need to be for you at different stages in your journey, that is its own roadmap to understand yourself through disruption, yourselves, or maybe yourself at different stages. And a part of what that brings you to is that third one that I call deschooling, which is really, it's also all of it. All of the stages go together. I say them like this for the purposes of the confines of words and language, but really they go wherever they want to go. I like to say that they smoke us out. And so the deschooling that you can sometimes lead to from the disruption is that opening, you know, the openings that bring up the recognition of resistance as ritual, you know, to think about the ways that not just Marley and Sage, but other people in my life have had to construct fires and elaborate things to get my attention. The way that Black people, wherever, whenever, still need to make assertions about humanness, or Native Indigenous people still reckon with what it means to be on or of, but not in and with your land because of where you are. For people to think about themselves as an ally and also feel completely unsure about what that might mean now. To be in community with people who are amazed and shocked about what is happening in America and feel your feelings and recognize that there are also things happening in other parts of the world that are not getting named because of these things, the same way that things were happening in Marley and Sage's bodies and in their spirits that were not being named and recognized because Chris and I had very clear ideas about what was supposed to be named and recognized, what did matter. Everything is everything, you know, as we say, everything is everything. There's no space where your learning isn't available. And there's also few spaces where who and what you can be as part of an ecology isn't potentially under siege. And that feels important to name as we navigate whatever the fuck we navigate, each of us now in these moments. I think about something different is coming through. Okay, so as I think about the ways that we continue to be with decolonizing, like what's happening here, where it becomes a little bit, where it becomes a little bit uh, easier to show up, you know, because I can do it in my pajamas, and that I can have a sense of certainty by having the color that I want to have over my eyelid, which is emerald green. And to have my children close by, and to invite the types of conversations that are not solution driven, to recognize these things as our roadmap and our destination, to recognize our resistance as the roadmap, to not move away from the place of uncertainty, but to use it to allow for your awareness and your disruption, and for it to bring in the type of deschooling, the type of decolonization, because I use those terms synonymously, um, the type of decolonization that then brings you over into whatever is to take shape, whatever is to take shape. And one of the things that I want to do to really, I don't know, bring that in some is to offer a bit of conversation with Marley, um, who is someone who graciously engages me in this conversation, as my friend Zakia Ismail talks about us um, as our children as natives, to unschooling and decolonization, and us as, I'm forgetting the term, but really as visitors to it. Um, Both of my daughters are really gracious in allowing that in their own ways, to be like, okay, since this is a thing for the grown-ups, let me just talk about like living in these humanized ways. And I'm also very curious. I look at the history of my own language and practice of colonization, oftentimes through the lens of how my children experience me. And it's what I put in my books and in my podcasts. And, so they are very much the grounds. And so I wanted to just bring in a little bit of discussion with Marley in particular, because that's a part of her jam, and Sage, if she's so inclined, around partnership and around the recognition of the ways that when you are allowed to practice in your sovereign space, the ways that informs your ecology and your relationships and the ways that you're in community. So I'll bring Miley in. And okay, somebody else will have to do the time thing, bio, because I don't even know where we are, because I just be getting them on.
We're exactly where we should be, Akila.
Okay. But you want to be here? All right. Okay, so without the headphones, because Marley's going to come in, but if you don't hear, please someone let me know, and then we'll do it. Okay, come on. You gonna switch here? You want me here? I don't know. Okay.
We can hear. Okay, cool.
All right. So this is Marley.
What's up?
So, as we talked about, I feel like it's so useful, and the feedback I get is that it's very useful. Oftentimes when people hear unschooling, there are all these things that show up, right? Like everybody here, for example, doesn't identify as an unschooler. So I'm really wanting to broaden, hopefully, to talk a little bit more about like partnerships and sovereignty and the ways that you were saying a part of your environment, how that informs like your personal leadership practice and that sort of thing.
Yes. Yeah. So I've been here listening the whole time, and it's interesting because, I saw someone say like unschooling is like saying defunding the police. And I think that that's a really good interpretation of it in terms of how much of a shock to the system it is. Even though I've been dealing with this since the very beginning, considering I was the subject of it all, I still have that sort of deschooling around it. So when we talk about the language of like, resistance and just being with the things that come up, to me, like applying that to myself is really different than applying it to other relationships. And I think I struggle with applying it to relationships a lot more than or applying it to myself more than I do with relationships. So one of the things that I thought would be helpful for anyone trying to think about how they can weave these things into actionables, I suppose, because sometimes that's a thing we can do, and when we can, it's great. I think to apply this sort of logic to yourself in terms of when you have resistance to your own feelings, like what can you take from that? How can you sit with that in a way that helps you, or in a way, not even helps you, in a way that just allows you to think things through. Like, how do you take time to think your thoughts? That's one of the things that's really come up as we developed our relationship, my mom and I. And
and around like, trust and language. So one of the things too is I talk about this patois, right? Like is like Creole, and for us, I had a very clear idea that what I knew is what my children should also know and understand. But then as we started to like be with resistance instead of trying to like dominate it or be like the one that's right or wrong. We developed a patois, like we developed a language, we co-created something that allowed for who she was and was becoming, and who I was and was becoming and unbecoming. And so it's like the idea of really thinking through your thoughts and being able to listen to what other people are saying, and knowing when you're thinking your thoughts over actually listening to them. These are the ways that we, especially me, started to recognize and acknowledge and act with the knowledge of her sovereignty. That those are the ways that she started to feel less like someone was doing something onto her, and more so that she was involved with, right? Like as we start to talk about.
Yeah, and the recognition of that development, because it is definitely a development, right? It's not just a thing that happened one day or it's done now. That sort of development is one that once I can recognize as a pattern between us, as I said, I can start to apply those things to myself with maybe without even having the terminology, just like, ready. So that sort of willingness to stop and recognize where thoughts are coming from, where feelings are coming from, the whole Socratic method of asking why until you can't anymore is very helpful for me. And it's something that both my mom has had to contend with, and like that we've developed language around. So that's sort of, what is that? Emotional intelligence, self-emotional intelligence, is something that I think comes sort of with the territory of developing a new sort of understanding of what a relationship is supposed to look like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a part of why I love to have these conversations out loud together too is to really disrupt the idea of intergenerational relationships. I had another, my whole life is sticky notes because I was talking about, oh, here it is, about overseeing, I don't know if you can see this, overseeing versus intergenerational partnership, right? Like so much of my mothering practice was very much like an overseer. And it also was a lot of what I was angry about. So many of like my stint in corporate America, all these other things had, like as it says, given me overseer, like so many things was that. Yet I had embodied that, and I was protective of it as well. And I saw it as a part of my way. Whereas as we really humanized the relationship, I really began to see the places where I was a part of a thing. It wasn't a destination that I chose. It was just a path that I was on. So now I got to design something based on the feedback and the consent, the continual consent of the people with whom I am in community. And that starts in my body and myself. And then it also extends to the people that I see when I wake up, before I might even wash my face, brush my teeth. And then it goes on to, all the way over to who you might vote for if you vote, right? So like these practices, one of the things that I love to bring up is the way that self-directedness, unschooling and these unravelings, they are skill sets. They're skill sets that come from it that I yell about from the mountaintop, because it isn't about school or not school. It's a decolonizing of self. It's that fourth thing is unschooling. It's awareness, disruption, deschooling, unschooling. And the unschooling part is to allow for and have skills for unbecoming, so that when you are together in the moments that you are, not just yourself, but selves, so that you can together better. But togethering necessitates that unraveling. And because that's where you collaborate, right? So to not fear that, but to really look at it. The resistance is the roadmap, to really look at it as not, how do I develop skills? Like, how do I breathe better while this is happening? The thing that's happening is the thing. That's what you breathe into. And that's a lot of what we learned, right? Like that there's skills, as we talk about, that comes from this. It's not, you don't just endure, there are skill sets themselves?
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the ways that it's been most obvious that all of this is, I don't know, working. Do you say what? Like, would you say? I don't even know if that's like the right term.
Right.
That there's an effect, I guess, and you can figure out whether that's positive, negative, or nothing. I don't know. One of the ways I've recognized that there's an effect at all is through my understanding of what productivity looks like. I'm told that having a strange relationship with the term productive is a very adult thing. But I think that's because it starts from when you're like the second year school age, right? So I think that when you like think about productive as a destination with no consideration for the treaty, a lot of times it can just be overworking. And I think that's something that everybody thinks is like when you say it out loud, it makes sense, but the application of that knowledge is just not allowed for or even encouraged or accepted uh, in our, in our social circles. So the part of the way that I've had to de-school the idea of productivity is to allow for emotion, and allow for that to be, I don't know, like allow for that to be a measure of
Right.
productivity. Like there are days where I feel productive because it was just like I felt good that day, and I was very intentional about making that a good day. Not even particularly because I was happy, like I was just in a good spot, and whatever that looked like was my productivity. And so shifting those terms and being able to go really deep into the meanings of things that are put on us so early is, I think, a really succinct way to understand what deschooling looks like. Like when you're like, why does a word mean anything? What is anything? What's that for? I think that's going in the right direction. It is a little existential in nature, I think, as a whole, but I'm kind of proud of it for that reason. It takes a lot of work. It is not a passive thing,
Right.
which I would say is one of like the big conceptions having to do with unschooling or anything that can't be understood, oftentimes only in an academic context, right? Like if you can't be like, all right, well, where are the numbers, where's the grades,
right,
then there's very little merit to it.
Yeah.
So
And that's
yeah.
another one of the skill sets, the metrics. As when Marley, I mean, I learned so much from just observing them and just children. There's a way that sovereignty is innate, and not only is it innate, like in youth, we are protective of it. We understand it as sacred, right? And that is such a knowing in and of itself, so that when Marley says something like, yeah, that's not how I measure things, then that's a whole dissertation, that's its own thing in my mind around metrics. It's an invitation for me to look at how I have been groomed and what are the shiny checkbox things that I navigate towards that cost me and the people around me so much. So this is personal leadership work that is also so ecological in its application. It's really useful when you talk about conflict and resistance, not just in self, but among other. Like, why does she resist me? What is in that for me? Really, not just when I'm in my Zen Buddhist mood, but like all the time on Wednesday when I'm mad. I develop the skills of recognizing, having that awareness, having things in place to disrupt what happens when I try to weaponize my awarenesses around, onto other people. What are the things that I have in place to disrupt that, so that I can begin my deschooling practice anew in each moment? Because as you said, there's no end point to it. What rituals have I recognized, or what groups am I part of, or what things have I intuited to be with the things that I need and feel? I love how Erin brought up at the beginning of this, this is where I come in from, so that we could all hold that, or not hold it, but bring it in, and not try to pretend that because we're here at this time that we're going to show up like this. Like, there's so much performance in just how we show up.
clothing can be performance, or if you decolonize it, like for me, clothing can be comfort. Clothing can be a part of my love language. And this is what we can learn as we start to look at resistance, as a very useful tool in our decolonization work, which I think is what many of us are reckoning with, whether we're deciding to do it or not. It's decolonizing.
Yeah. And I thought something important to bring up, like all cards on the table, mom asked me about this and she's like, do you want to do it? Do you want to talk to the big group? I was like, yeah. However, so I think this is a really good group for me, because normally I speak with people who are familiar with unschooling, and to have people who are just now hearing it in this context and getting a deeper understanding is really interesting, because I think even without noticing, the tendency is to compare it. So like to weigh it against conventional schooling, or even just like a basic understanding of homeschooling. And one of the very common experiences I have, me being 16 and everything like that, is, oh, well, like you can do it because you're, whatever thing you want to put there, but my kids couldn't. Like my kids are just like, they just want to sit down and chill out. And I'm like, I think it's important to remember when it comes to resistance, is just like, there is no age or type of person that wouldn't benefit from knowing themselves better. Like there is no type of person that wouldn't benefit from having more time to think, period, to just think at all. And so that kind of, I assume it's said in good faith, but that kind of like willingness to compare so that they can put down, they can justify whatever concerns they have about what's going to come up with their kid, or like a kid that they care about, I think is one of the things that I just wanted to like preemptively call out. I think because I know this is going to be on like everyone's minds for however long, but I just wanted to put that into it alongside whatever thoughts you're having, is like, there is no person, no type of person that doesn't benefit from having time to think about these sorts of things. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Switch up. So that's what's here. That's what we saw fit to bring, and what we witnessed happening. And yeah, it feels good. It feels good to be here and to bring this in and to continue these conversations in our psychic spaces, in our bodies here, and however they continue to flow. Thank you all for your presence and attention.
Welcome back. Welcome back. Oh, that was that's thank you again to Marley and Akila and Sage for bringing that beautiful, I dare say, transmission. And it's such a beautiful exemplification, embodiment of the idea that we ought to listen to our children. Yoruba people have a name. I think we signal that in the names we give our children. When we say, for instance, Babatunde, Iyabo, Iyeye Wande, those are names that speak about elders coming back. So the Cartesian Victorian idea that kids are tabula rasas, empty slates that we have to fill with our glorious phallic pens, is disrupted by the idea that children have something to give us, and they are part of what making sanctuary must be about listening, meeting our kids halfway. And that is why we're also unschooling with our kids. My wife likes to say that we're unschooling ourselves just as much, because we've been through a lot of crap. We've been through a lot of destination stuff. We've eaten a lot of destination peddling stuff. Productivity is, like Marley said so brilliantly. I can't quite recall how she said it, but the idea that productivity is tethered to a particular mode of being, a particular way of being in the world, is upended, is undercut, is overwhelmed by this idea that it could mean something entirely different. Emotional intelligence, laying in the bed like Aaron, is a form of productivity that we haven't even begun to explore yet. Laziness might be some form of activism. Sleeping well, resting. I should take that advice myself, I think Karen would say. And that is what making sanctuary is. Making sanctuary is leaning into the promises of becoming unruly, becoming more and more unruly. Because the powers of today want to render us intelligible, coherent, put together nicely. That is the effect, that is the promise of colonization, so that you can be named, categorized, put in the family way. And what Akila speaking about here is drawing on this idea that even those places we've been pressed into, our work is not to run away from them, because there's a gift. The gift is right there. It's not somewhere else. It's right there. Our work is not to be shinier. It's not to arrive at some destination. It's to stay with this gift that we've been pressed into. That's where the trouble is, and that's where the gift and treasure is as well. So let me do a previously with We Will Dance with Mountains by doing a recap of some of these ideas. The long thread, if you will, that we pull, that runs through the entire sessions, has been this idea of fugitivity. Okay, fugitivity. Just for our, understanding again, that fugitivity is not just merely escaping. Fugitivity is upending the paradigms, the imperatives of the plantation that reinforces the familiar. Fugitivity is the plantation being queered by something it does not expect. When the fugitive flees, that is the plantation being undone, if you will. And what we're being invited into is this place of unruliness. We're learning to unlearn the mastery of colonial oppressive paradigms. We're learning to find the gifts in the so-called impoverished places where we are. We're learning to recover from productivity as this topographical certitude that leaves us hanging, always inadequate, because we're measuring ourselves against an elusive paradigm, an elusive measure. So this idea of fugitivity is the cord that feeds into making sanctuary. And making sanctuary is the place, it's the ethos of playing with the world. It's the ethos of inquiring, performing inquiry with the world, and allowing ourselves to be touched by that in return. One of my dear friends, it's not just my dear friend, it's a friend of ours, many of us here, Aaron, Karen, Jordy, Archana, Manish Jain, would say that children are one of the most exploited groups in the world. They're one of the most exploited groups in the world. They come into the world, and I think God gifts children to us as cracks. I don't think God finished creating the world in the book of Genesis. I think he creates the world every time a child is born. And what we do with that is an opportunity. What we do with that is the risk. We could fill the crack up like modernity would like us to do, or we could lean into it and stay with the opportunity for that. I just want to share, I really feel I was vibrating, you see, guys. I was vibrating, trembling with energy as I was listening to my dear daughter, Marley. And I feel like staying with that and dreaming good dreams with that, and just saying one day when I grow up, I'll be like Marley. but I just want to share a few thoughts. And it starts with, let me pose it as a question. How many of you remember where you were when Mandela was freed? If you know when that was. No? Anyone here? For $1 billion? You want to know? Do you remember when that? Aaron, you want to answer? Marigold says yes.
I'm
No?
looking for hands.
No, don't Google it. No one. If you Google, don't dare Google it. It was February 11th, 1990. I was 7, so I don't know where I was. I was my daughter's age at this time. But it was a momentous thing because the ripples of that, I still vaguely remember seeing it on TV. It was a huge deal. He walked out, fists in the air, and Winnie Mandela at his side. And the whole world was crazy with that moment. Just Mandela is free after 27 years of being incarcerated since 1964. He was free, finally. Mandela stepped out of prison when he was 73. He would go on to be president of South Africa when he turned 77. That was in 1994. And then he would die in 2013. One of the most profound stories, especially for people like me. But there was, in 1990, shortly after Mandela stepped out of prison, he traveled to the United States, you see, and he was, they set up this thing for him, an interview, a town hall. And in the town hall, he was supposed to speak about his experience with a guy called Ted Koppel. If I remember, Ted Koppel. Is it Koppel? Koppel? Okay, you guys know better. Ted Koppel.
Ted Koppel.
And Ted was it was ABC. It was a program called Nightline, and Mandela was there in his stoic, regal self, soft on the inside and hard as Aaron. I was going to use the French word there, hard as shit. And then during the proceedings, Ted signaled to someone in the audience and said, someone wants to ask you a question. And this guy, Ken Edelman, I've watched this video 100 times. It's on YouTube. You can go check it out when you want to. Mandela, the way people describe things today, you would have to type Mandela destroys journalist in order to find it. The way we have trivialized moments of conversation. So it's Mandela destroys journalist, and that video will pop out. But I've watched it more than 100 times, I tell you. So Ken Edelman works with some human rightsy thingy. He gets up and he basically says, we respect you, Mandela. Wonderful work. You're an icon. You're a living legend. Thank you for all you're doing. But there's something problematic here. See, you've allied yourself with people like Fidel Castro, like Yasser Arafat, and with Colonel Gaddafi. Now, these guys are terrible supervillains, human rights violators. Why would you do this? Would you like these people to rule in South Africa? How could you do something like this? It was almost reminiscent of that passage in the Bible where people come to this rabbi, Jesus, and say, what do you do with this lady who has violated all the laws? She's wrong. What do you do now? And what follows is probably one of the most brilliant I'm getting too cold. Let me put up the air conditioner. One of the most brilliant moments on ever captured in film, in my opinion. Mandela looks up, looks down, looks up very swiftly. His visage doesn't change. He remains expressionless or emotionless. And then he says, in that his epic Mandela voice, you see, one of the many things that many political analysts get wrong is that they think that your enemies ought to be our enemies. Mic drop. Explosion. Everyone gets up. Well, not everyone. The Black people get up. The Black people get up because they knew what was up. It erupted. Everyone clapping. I think the Americans were like, what's happening here? We don't know what's happening here. But every other person, the South Africans, were chanting and dancing. And I think I know why, because I think I know why that was the case. It wasn't just only the fact that Mandela had tapped into something that was visceral and corporeal and real about minoritarian experiences. It wasn't just that he had brilliantly performed some kind of moral intellectual jujitsu and navigated his way out of a binarizing question. Either you're good or you're bad. It wasn't just all of that. It was that he was rejecting an ethical monoculture. He was rejecting. He didn't deny that Yasser Arafat had problems. He did not say, no, Cuba's Fidel Castro is a holy man. He didn't prevaricate and dance here and there. He didn't say any of that. He basically reiterated the ground upon which he stood and said, they have supported us to a hilt. They have supported our struggle as anti-apartheid, as an anti-apartheid movement. You can argue that, in the latter years of the ANC, that doesn't seem to be the case. The ANC no longer seems to be about, the African National Congress doesn't seem to be about emancipation anymore. It seems to be about corruption. But this was prior to all of that. And in those moments of innocence, if you will, he undercut the colonizer's logic that if you're going to get by, you have to accept my destination. You have to accept my view of things. You have to be good in order to arrive. That ethical monoculture still exists today in our activisms, in the ways we're responding to crisis, in the ways we understand how the world is becoming. In many respects, the left, the political left, and its insistence that this is the only way to frame responsivity and responsibility. If you're not speaking like us, thinking like us, dressing like us, using terms like us, then you're unrighteous. And you should be done away with. And so when I hear Akila speak about a destination peddling, I really hear her echoing Mandela and saying, I don't need to do that. I don't need to measure up. I hear Marley when she says, I can throw out your ruler altogether and construct mine in a village, with other fugitives. I don't need to subscribe to this notion. I don't need to measure here, to measure up to this. I've been speaking about making sanctuary. And I've resisted the notion to boil it down to one thing. I don't know that making sanctuary has to be one thing. If it's one thing, then it's too poor. If it's everything, then it's not useful. Somewhere between the spectrum of being one thing and being everything is a constellation of fugitive technologies that might allow us to meet the world differently. I definitely count what Akila is doing as a member of this parliament of voices in the world today. that how we meet the world differently, and it doesn't have to be profound. It's modest. It's modest work, you see, that in cooking together, cooking could be a form of activism. In sitting with my grandmother, that there is making sanctuary. Because it's really about becoming lost, you see. And again, I speak about becoming lost um, because if we're not lost, we might not happen on new ideas. Let me break that down a bit. Um, there's this pervasive notion, and it's especially now in a time when the very concept of the scientific method is pervasive, and people are asking questions about the vaccine. I'm not about to go into a conversation about vaccines right now, um, but the scientific method is right now in the dock. It's the jury is out, and people are asking questions about it. One popular understanding of the scientific method is basically that we just need to discover new things. That the world is already put together. All we need to do is to solve our problems by designing our way out of it. And that would take the kind of processes that the scientific method provides. What escapes imagination is the scientific method is extremely conservative. It's not designed to proliferate the new. It basically, and especially the deductive reasoning part of it, there's inductive research, but also you can argue that that is also anthropological and anthropocentric. But the deductive reasoning takes a hypothesis and then plays with it in a form of verifying whether it's true or not. But you see, to frame a hypothesis, I have to depend on the imagination of the familiar. I have to depend on what's already there. What kind of processes might lead me to places that I've never been before? What kind of work might take me to the new, the surprising, the never heard of, the impossible? I think we've tried the possible for so long and we're stuck. And so our invitation now is to get lost. And getting lost might feel and look like, this is the reason why I was punching the air, a mother sitting with her daughter and a daughter sitting with a mother, and I'm trying to figure out which is which. That is the invitation of our times. I don't want us to have a single approach. I want us to have a village together, you see. And I want to peer, gaze into Eileen's kitchen one day, and for Eileen to cook a meal. And I know that in the cooking of that meal, new worlds are being born. I want to know what Aaron and Vidya, I'm naming all the people on my screen, are doing with your gardens, because these are at once simultaneously, the undoing of the territoriality of modernity, the imperatives of oppression and the dominant culture. This is becoming minoritarian. We speak a lot about identifying with minorities, which I feel is a form of reinforcing tyranny, because it's about inclusion, bringing you into the paradigm, bringing you into the family. I don't want to be part of the family. I'm tired of being in the family. I want out. I want to sneak away. I want to run. So I don't want you to. I might need you to. If we're traveling to the airport, I might need you to step up sometimes to help me get through. Erin, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. I might need you to you to show your faith for me, but that's just circumstantial. I want a world where colonization is impossible, or is flattened. I want that notion of power that is wordless. And it's wordless because of the way that Aquila demonstrated it with her hands, diffractive. That's what I'm eager for. I want to meet my child, my children, and listen to all the wisdoms. Who wrote that chat? Who put that thing in the chat? There, a child said, "How is the?" I wrote it down. How is the? Will the clock hurt me? Will the clock hurt me? A 2-year-old child. Oh my! That's a sermon. That's a lecture. That's an entire course. So I think we are being invited to become ghosts. The modern nation states proliferates two kinds of bodies: the citizen subject and inadvertently, accidentally, ghosts. The modern nation state is designed, programmed, machinic, it's designed to proliferate conditions that support the citizen subject, this intelligible, atomic, locatable figure. Minorities are often invited into this terrain of citizen subjecthood, the paradigm of liberal humanism. We sometimes invited in, but not fully. And this is why I forget her name, this author of Becoming Animal would say that, that even inclusion is a form of violence, that even those that have been included are included into, a continuum and into a station that exists at the very end of this continuum, closer to the animal than closer to the citizen subject, so that inclusion perpetuates this violence. Minorities and minoritarian bodies have been pointing out that, look, it's not that justice isn't working for us, guys. Justice isn't working. It's not working. The modern nation state does not understand that, because its algorithms, its binarized algorithms teach it to respond only in terms of garbage in, garbage out. Justice ought to work. Police officers are either bad or good. But minorities and minoritarian bodies, and I'm not trying to create some kind of racialized distinction here, are in touch with trauma, are in touch with ancestral tuggings, are in touch with ecological demands on our bodies, are in touch with so much energy, fields upon fields and palimpsests upon palimpsests, so that they say, in an essence, we see ghosts, but the modern nation state does not see ghosts. Maybe the siege, Aquila, the siege, the recent siege, the storming, not of the Bastille this time, but of the capital. Maybe that was the system finally noticing that even the avatars of the modern nation state, of modern civilization, are no less ghosts. They're just as ghostly, because they were not behaving according to the program. And so the invitation. Now, our activism is therefore about becoming corporeal, becoming intelligible to the system, because we're ghosts, you see. Except I want to say this about ghosts. The modern reproduction, the cultural reproduction of the ghost is as something disembodied. And I think that's a mistake. I think ghosts are queer embodiments. That we are all ghosts is what I want to say. Beyond the citizen subject are fields upon fields of generosity. And we need different kinds of activisms to penetrate them. And what we've spoken about today, and what we'll continue to speak about, even when this course is over, is ways we can inhabit those ghastly and ghostly places. Because that's where we might learn to become different. That's where we might glimpse and sit with moments where Marley can be the elder in our midst. So justice is not enough, folks. Justice is not the end game here. I dare say, let me name it something different. Let me call it assemblies. like justice is the rectilinear conformity to a transcendent idea of resolution. It's about arriving somewhere, but the modern nation state is the avatar of this arrival. Now let's reframe justice altogether. Let's find our own ways of learning with our children. Let's sit with grandmas. Let's dance. Let's put together a translocal aesthetic by digging into our gardens, by listening to the world around us, by performing a weird politics. And maybe when we do that, we might have the beans, the gifts with which, in a gift culture that is invisible, rhizomatic, undetectable by surveillance systems, we might find a way to reworld the world, and then it might become something different. So the power is not in capital. The power is not with Ted Koppel and Ken Edelman. Ken Edelman, by the way, this is the long arc of his story. Ken Edelman supported the Iraq War later on. So here's a guy championing human rights, later becoming the villain, so to speak, that he championed against. The power is not with the establishment. The power is yet to come. The power is yet to arrive. So our work, people, in making sanctuary, in raising free people, in staying with the cracks, in becoming ghosts, in becoming undetectable, in cooking in the kitchen, in composting our fields, is to learn how to become otherwise. Okay. That's it for me.